Hola Amiga, welcome back to my channel. I'm Rosa, and in this video, I want to talk about reconnecting to my Latina roots. It's been a long journey for me, and I'm really excited to share and talk a little bit about this topic that I think so many people have gone through. And really, this just is another part of my self-discovery and self-acceptance. If you're new here, I do videos around these two exact topics. So if you want to stay tuned and updated, then definitely make sure to subscribe and follow. Well, I hope you have your cafecito because it's going to be a long chat. I'm actually drinking some cacao. It's from Guatemala. So I can finally say that I'm in a place where I am so proud and so happy to say that I'm Latina. And it took a long time to get to this place. It's been an incredibly long journey. So I thought it would be helpful to start at the beginning, but first let me take a sip. Like many immigrants and first-generation Americans, Spanish was my first language. Both of my parents immigrated to the US from Guatemala about maybe 4 or 3 years before I was born. So obviously I was born into a house and a home where Spanish was the only language that was spoken. I was also born into a family and a home where there were so many rich cultural rituals and practices and so much beauty in the day-to-day. So when I started school, I did not know a lick of English and I only spoke Spanish. Naturally, I got placed into ESL classes, which were all taught in Spanish, basically with the efforts to try to get you to a place where you can know English and be able to participate in like normal classes. And from childhood, I actually have a very specific memory. I started a brand new school and started in a new district. I got placed into all English classes without, again, really knowing very much English because I had spent the last 3 years in ESL classes. And my parents didn't know very much English as well. I specifically remember my mom telling me before going to school on the first day, she was basically trying to help me know just a few words so that I could survive the first few days of school. Most importantly, my mom wanted me to be able to ask for water and ask to use the restroom. So on my second day of class, I went up to the teacher and I said, "Miss, I'm Christy." And she looked at me very strangely and I said, "Miss, I'm Christy." And she was like, "What's going on? Your name is Rosa. I don't understand." And after multiple tries, she eventually understood that I was trying to say that I was thirsty and that I needed to drink water. So needless to say, there was a very embarrassing experience, but I think one that really shows the vulnerability and the challenges of trying to assimilate and also trying to grow up in this world. I struggled a lot as a kid, but I was a very bright kid and I learned very quickly. As I grew older and I grew into my late teenage years, I really started to assimilate and start really making the effort to try to fit in. Of course, notice that in TV and advertisement, billboards, music, every basically media outlet that I was constantly surrounded in, I saw American culture and American, traditionally I would say white people, being displayed as the beautiful people, as the smart individuals, as successful people, the ones filled with friends, with romances, with travel, with job opportunities, and the list goes on. Of course, this sent the message to me that the best way and the proper way and the most successful way to be was to be American. Things really kicked into high gear when I transferred into UC Santa Barbara to study for my 4-year bachelor degree. When I attended UC Santa Barbara, the undergrad demographic was close to 60% being white. I felt like everywhere I looked was this tall, beautiful, blonde like model that had just walked off of like a Hollister campaign or Abercrombie. I very much felt like the odd person out. Not only did I feel that way, but I definitely was looked at very differently, whether it was from the cute guy at the fraternity party or even a professor. I definitely had people behave slightly slightly different, or maybe talk to me a little bit differently than other students that were around. Let me tell you, this is definitely one of the hardest points, I would say, in my journey of connecting to my roots and being proud of being Latina, because during this time, I hated and criticized every part of my ethnicity and of being Latina. I criticized the way I looked, from, you know, my body shape, to the color of my skin, to my hair color, to the way I dressed, to speaking Spanish. I became so self-conscious, and I was constantly monitoring whenever I spoke, when I walked, when I moved. And let me tell you, that is not a way to live. I desperately tried to not speak Spanish during that time. I tried to not wear hoops because I was afraid of how Latina I was gonna look. I started dyeing my hair. I dressed in the like beachy girl kind of style. To take it a step further, I struggled so much being around my friends that were also Latina, and every time they would speak Spanish, I would cringe, or every time their like inflection kind of showed that they had an accent in the way that they talked to our peers and our friends, I would cringe, and I would feel so like on edge and felt like we were going to get caught. This desperate attempt to fit in and make sure not to make people feel uncomfortable kept going on into my early 20s. When I started working, I jumped into the technology industry, and this is definitely an industry that struggles a lot with diversity. I was constantly one of the few minorities in the room, and particularly one of the very few Latinas in any team and really company sometimes. So once again, I tried to be a chameleon. I tried desperately to fit in, to not stand out, and to really hide my roots. In turn, this created so much stress for me and this constant feeling of getting caught. It took a lot of work to constantly be monitoring the way I spoke, the way I dressed, the way I looked. And it was so exhausting. It left me feeling so disconnected and so unsure of who I was. All right, so let's talk about the fun stuff. The transition into embracing my roots started about 6 years ago, and I will never forget the moment I put gold hoops back on for the first time, because your girl loved gold hoops growing up. Like, you saw me in all sizes of hoops growing up. You know, it really saddens me that for so long I didn't wear hoops because I was so afraid of looking too Latina. And I know this is something that a lot of women share. And now, fast forward to today, you will not catch me obviously not wearing some kind of hoops. It all started for me very, very slowly. And when I say slowly, I mean slowly. It was baby steps, reconnecting and embracing my look, my skin color, my hair, the wardrobe, the way I spoke in Spanish. All of that good stuff was definitely something that took me a long time, and it was a very slow process to be able to re-embrace. There was a moment for me that was certainly a turning point for me, and that was when I got to go to Guatemala with my dad for the first time in, I think it had been like 16 years. And it was one of the most special trips of my life, because in this trip, I got the opportunity to walk through the same paths and the same roads and the same jungles that my ancestors and my family had and does, because I still have a lot of family in Guatemala. I also got a chance to eat the foods that my family and my ancestors consumed. I got a chance to experience the vibrant colors and the textiles and the clothing. I also got to hear all of the different dialects. My family also speaks the dialect. Dialects are derived from Mayan language, which is so incredibly special and so unique. And more importantly, I went during a time that was filled with festivities, which was Dia de los Santos. So I got a chance to go to my parents' tiny little pueblo in Guatemala that's like in the mountains and absolutely gorgeous surroundings, but it's a very small pueblo with a lot of indigenous women, indigenous people. and I got a chance to go to the cemetery and partake in all of the celebrations. There was so much marimba and so many vibrant colors. Everything was incredibly colorful. There were people dancing, there were people eating, singing, drinking, and wow, it was such an experience. And what's more important about that is the fact that we have these beautiful rituals that reconnect us to our ancestors and that takes a moment to talk about death and to bring this positive outlook into death. In addition to participating in the fiestas, I also got a chance to finally meet a lot of my family members, a lot of aunts, a lot of cousins and uncles. Unfortunately, all of my grandparents have passed, but I did have a chance to meet so many other family members that I had never met or had a chance to connect with. And this whole experience was absolutely magical, and it made me feel so proud of everything that my family has walked through, and the beautiful languages and the beautiful food and the beautiful rituals that have been a part of my family for so long. It made me really sad, honestly, that I had wasted so many years to not participate and embrace and celebrate all of my languages, my culture, and of course the foods and the practices that are so embedded into my family. After this remarkable trip, when I came back home, I slowly started to speak more Spanish. And I know this sounds like such a small thing, but the fact that I was now actively looking to speak Spanish and to talk to others in Spanish and to reconnect to my language was something that was such a milestone for me. I also came back with a new lens, and I wanted to learn more about my culture, more about my background. So I really took it upon myself to ask more questions from my family, from my parents, from the internet as well, and learn as much as I could about my roots. I'm still very much in a lot of spaces where I'm constantly surrounded by white Americans. I even married a gringo, and it just so happened that way. And you know, it's still not always easy. It actually takes me a constant effort and a notable drive to be able to constantly embrace my roots and not be afraid to speak Spanish and talk about my rituals and my language and traditions, etc. And obviously it's not always ideal to have to be cognizant and being in these places and these environments, but that's just the fact of my life. I made such a drastic change. I'm no longer afraid to speak Spanish. If I say, let's go get tacos, I'm not gonna say tacos. One big achievement for me was actually when I launched my company, that's now closed down, unfortunately, but my company was Miel Oro, and this was a fine jewelry brand that celebrated Latinas and that constantly brought a voice and talked about my experiences growing up Latina, particularly as it relates to the femininity of Latinas. And this was a place where I got to celebrate, where I got to explore, where I got to talk about and really bring into the media and bring a voice for us into social media platforms, which was an incredibly powerful experience for me. In addition to that, I now share my traditions to friends that might not have as much information or might not be as aware of some of the traditions. For example, I set up an ofrenda table at my church, and I talked about and shared a little bit about what that practice means for us, and that was such a beautiful thing to share with my community. Additionally, I plan to teach my kids how to speak Spanish. When that time comes in my life, I am definitely committed to teaching my children to speaking Spanish, to also participating in our rituals and our practices and connecting them to their roots. Another notable thing for me is that I no longer push my mom away when she wants me to participate in rituals. Like, for example, the passing the huevo for getting rid of all that bad energy. I actually encourage it now. I ask her for her help, and I ask her questions about it, and I'm so much more open. I'm so much more likely to embrace these beautiful rituals than I was in the past, where I was like, how embarrassing, get this away from me, I don't know anything about it, you know. So it's such a drastic contrast from what it was like before. And overall, my life is drastically different from what it was like before. Instead of critiquing and criticizing my roots, I now celebrate and embrace them. And ultimately, this has led me to a place where I'm much more accepting of who I truly am. And with that, I think comes a lot of love and compassion for yourself. Not only my internal dialogue and my internal relationship has changed, but my friendships, my romantic relationship, my relationship to my family has also drastically changed. I can be myself more authentically, and in turn, they're able to have a much closer relationship to me, one that is filled with a lot more trust and a lot more love. Assimilating was honestly something that was essential for surviving at the time, but making the transition into embracing my Latin roots has been a powerful step towards self-acceptance and reconnecting to my authentic self. I really hope that you're able to walk away with something from my story. Maybe you've shared a very similar past or are currently going through the same experience. Thank you so much for watching my video and listening and hearing my story. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to stay in touch and help support my channel. Thank you once again for watching. If you have any questions or if you have any comments, definitely leave them below. And until next week, can't wait to see you guys. Thank you again and take care. Adios.